Hi, this is Mimi.
And this is Lee. In this episode, we are discussing why tapping puts you in the driver's seat of your life.
I love that. Like, who doesn't want to be in the driver's seat of their own life?
Yes, exactly. I like that image a lot. I always want to feel like that.
Yeah. And so I just want to say before we jump into it, tapping is one of those things that I've heard about for years. And then I just kind of started doing it with, under your guidance and tutelage. But as we started creating it and bringing it into our book and developing our free series, which we'll link to in here, we have a free tapping series, which is just beautiful. I started to think and ask Lee, what's the history of this? Like, let's kind of dive into where it originated and how it became the phenomenon. I think that it's like a silent phenomenon, right? Like, once you hear about it everywhere.
Right.
You have to have somebody that introduces you to it. So that's kind of, we're going to be exploring today the questions that, that we've had about tapping.
Mm-hmm. And even though I've been tapping for years, I don't know I'm not like the big overall historian of tapping. So I wanted to find out a little bit more about the history and how it came into being. And so, yeah, this is now going to be a 2-part series because in this episode, we are going to do kind of deep dive on what it is, how does it work, the history, all that stuff. And then next podcast will be about a book on tapping because we want to kind of do an analysis or review, just read it, see what we think. If you're on YouTube, you can see Mimi holding up the book, The Tapping Solution by Nick Ortner. So if you want to follow along, get the book on Audible or wherever, and we'll be talking about that next time.
Yeah. So let's dive in, Lee. What is tapping?
Okay. So it's funny because I know because I've been doing it for years, I do know what it is, but I was really interested in kind of the history too, to kind of help understand more about what it is. So tapping was first known as something called EFT, which stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. And it was designed as an alternative treatment technique and has been proven to resolve issues like stress, anxiety, phobias, emotional disorders, chronic pain. I've used it for headaches personally, weight control, limiting beliefs, etc. So it has a wide variety of usages, which is fascinating. And this comes from the man who first developed this, and I'll talk about that in a sec. It's coming out of academia, and then these studies we're going to be mentioning are real medical, verifiable, repeatable studies. So that really makes me like it even more because I've tried it. I know it works. But anyway, for people who don't know what tapping is, it consists of tapping with your fingers on specific meridian points on your body. And by doing this, it balances the nervous system, most importantly, and restores the body's balance and energy. So the ultimate, and here's another thing I found out
Let me
about.
just say, before you jump into that, like that whole idea of tapping with your fingers all over your body was enough to make me think, I don't know about this. Like, I think you have to, before you even start dipping into what tapping is, you have to say to yourself, I'm going to be willing to give this a try, even though it's going to feel super awkward. I mean, just what Lee says, tapping consists of tapping with your fingers on specific meridian points all over your body. I was like, okay. So it's like, you have to really open your mind that this is something new and different I've never done before.
Yeah. Yes, I'm glad you bring that up because in the beginning, I'm always intrigued by alternative therapies. I'm curious. It doesn't mean I buy into all of them or try all of them. So, because some things sound far out, it's like, how could that possibly help what I need help with? And I think part of tapping was I was open to it because I have been treated with acupuncture for migraines back. I don't have migraines anymore because I think it was hormonal, but I had chronic migraines for a while. They would come and go, but then when they came, it might be like a year of migraines, not every single day all the time, but it would be like a lot of migraines. And so acupuncture, which is more invasive and uses needles, really helped me with pain management, and even I think healed it for a long time. So, you can kind of trace the concept of this in the meridians, the known energy pathways, back to ancient Chinese medicine. So it has, a long history. And I think for people who are like, I don't know about this, understanding that it's based on some really solid science, thousands of years of Eastern medicine. So I think for the skeptics among us, that's helpful to know. Because I actually, you wouldn't know it sometimes by the way I talk, but I actually am a skeptic. I look at things with a critical lens, like, does this work? Really? And how effective is it? It's just a little effective, a lot effective. I definitely always look at things through the lens of analyzing it. Like, do I really think this is based on something sound?
Yeah, I think that's why Lee is always like, and there's scientific studies for these, and she goes and reads them. I go and pull them up, and I was like, oh my gosh, like where's the easier to understand language tucked within this, within these scientific studies? But we do have a lot of them linked below, and it is kind of fascinating, some of the things that you can pull out of them.
And for people who don't like reading through scientific studies, usually they have kind of an abstract on the front page and then kind of their own conclusion drawing. And so that's summarized at the beginning of a study. So you don't need to read the whole thing, because a lot of it's very boring and dense and dry, but you can see kind of their resolution. Sometimes it's inconclusive, but whatever. That's the one tip for how to read those things. So back to these tapping on meridians. So you're using your fingertips on specific meridian points on your body. The ones we use tend to be around the head and the upper chest and under the arm. And it balances the nervous system and restores the body's balance and energy. Again, lots of studies. So we said you can kind of track back to ancient Chinese medicine by, using these meridian points or acupressure points. But in the US, and here's what I found when I started researching this, that different people take credit for developing it. So you're going to find that yourself when you Google it, if you feel like Googling it like I do. There are going to be different stories about how it started. But the one that I was most compelled by, because the people who mention this, I know, are experts on the topic and been really digging into it themselves. So EFT, which is the other name for tapping, was founded by a man named Dr. Roger Callahan in 1979. So he applied something called applied kinesiology. Thank you. And studied the meridian system of acupuncture. I'm tumbling over my words today, in search of solutions to some of the problems that his patients were having, and particularly problems with anxiety and phobias. So then everything that grew out of that, what he was doing, kind of slowly became tapping by the 90s.
Yeah. One, I think this is so fascinating and so typical of Western medicine, right? This idea that all of these more modern scientists are taking credit for founding something that's been around for
right.
so long. But I think it's probably what they're taking credit for is we're taking these concepts that other cultures have been using for centuries, maybe even, and putting them in a language and a system that is more accessible to today's, consumer or user or practitioner of it, and then putting the scientific data behind it. So these are the people that I'm guessing are the originators of, let's put some science behind this. and
Mhm.
let's apply it to some very specific things. Like he said, he was using it with his patients that were dealing with anxieties and phobias. So I think like that's like this idea of how it's founded, and there's all these new people that are founding it, is because what they're doing it is putting it in a language in a way that we can understand it and study it.
Mhm.
That's my thought about it.
And just another thing that can happen, I'm not sure that's what happened in this
Yeah.
case, but another thing that can happen is sort of the 100 monkey effect, which is when a lot of people are trying to solve the same problems around the world. I don't know if this, I may not be paralleling 100th monkey effect enough, but with my talk here, so forgive me if it doesn't quite shake out, but people can be discovering things in different parts of the planet at the same time, never knowing about the other person discovering it. It's just a part of progress and advancement in medicine and sciences. So sometimes it is murky, like who did discover this? Sometimes it's several people during the same year or a couple of years.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm from North Carolina, so I will always believe that Orville and Wilbur Wright invented flight. Although I know there's lots of places around the
Yes.
world that are
Yeah.
like, well, we were first. We were first. So
Yeah,
they're
that's a
the
good
first ones to get it
example.
out, and us North Carolinians cling to that. So
Yeah, exactly. So the other thing to know about tapping is, aside from literally tapping with your fingers on specific meridian points in your body, using language while you do it is the most effective way to do it. And the language is ideally to do with the problem you're trying to solve or the relief you're trying to get. So if you can speak to the issue you're having as you tap, and then there's kind of a progress or an arc to how you speak about it. You know, it's like a story has a beginning, middle, and end. So would perhaps your tapping session, you know, and so you kind of, I won't go too far into how you do it, but what you say, how you say it does matter just to a degree.
yeah, because you try to move from the negative to the positive. Like the
Mhm.
point or the benefit of tapping is to shift from a negative to a positive, so that somebody that has anxiety and phobias are tapping away from those phobias to something more positive. So their
Yes, that's
language takes them on that arc, right?
yeah. It just keeps your mind focused, and then you know, you hear these words on a certain level and they become words are powerful. I mean, sometimes we have to back up and understand how powerful words are. So they do make a difference. And so when we teach tapping, we're tapping and following kind of a script of stuff to
Yeah.
say.
Okay. So you've mentioned meridian points a few times.
Yeah, right. What the
So,
heck? Yeah, what are
so
they?
what is a meridian? What are meridian points? And are they the same on everybody? Does every person have the same meridian points?
Yes to that question. Everybody has the same meridians. And, you know, again, in doing research, there are 9 meridian points, but, you know, there could be more, but there are 9 that we use. But I've seen it around in different places, you know, with people who've been tapping a long time and teaching it, that, you know, they say 9 meridian points, and we use, I think, 9. So if you think of your, you know, I love a good metaphor or analogy. So I was trying to think of something to compare this to, so you could kind of envision it or understand what we're talking about. So if you think of your body's energy as a large subway system with tunnels and trains moving around, you know, energy's moving around with those trains. There are certain, if you've ever been like in the New York subway system, you go through these intersection points or switch points where you might switch tracks. And you can see that other tunnels are all coming to this one point. And so your energy system in your body is much like that. It has little highways or tunnels, and then there's certain intersection points, which are more like the meridians. So put simply, meridian points are like the intersections and switch points where the energy can sometimes slow down or get congested instead of freely circulating through your body. And again, we mentioned 9.
I
And
love that metaphor. I haven't thought about it in that exact same way before, but this idea of a subway, and it just immediately makes me think of Lee and I were roommates in Boston, which also has a subway system,
yeah.
of when you're on the wrong train
Oh, yeah.
and the
Yeah.
energy of being on the wrong train, and how do you have to get back on the right track to get to where you're going. I love that analogy of the subway.
Right, right. So when we talk about like issues you're facing, often any problematic issues you're facing have some negative emotions associated with whatever that is. And when you have these negative emotions, somehow it disrupts your body's energy flow. I don't know enough to explain how, but that's what I found in reading about this, that negative emotions, again, are felt through the disruption of the body's energy. I think it's kind of a chicken and egg thing sometimes. And if you can restore balance to your body's energy system, then you can begin to heal the negative emotions and physical symptoms that stem from the energy disruption. So it's a restorative, it's restoring your system into balance, and also using the power of thoughts and switching and shifting your perspective to new thoughts. That really is a game changer when you do all that together.
Yeah, I think that helps explain why the actual physical tapping on these points
Mm-hmm.
and the language are so powerful together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, what creates the gut punch feeling you can have when you have a negative emotion?
Mm-hmm.
Is it driven from the thought?
Mm-hmm.
Where does that start? So to work on both of those simultaneously, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a combination of the language and the tapping. Although I know that just doing the physical part can help.
Absolutely. That's why you don't always need a script if you're just feeling anxious or feeling like you want to use this tool. You don't need to speak out loud, because sometimes that's the hardest thing for people to do, is to know
Yeah.
what to say. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that's what trips me up is, am I going to say anything in the wrong order? I didn't want to be tapping the negative in when I'm trying to switch it to a positive. I was like, oh, I've tapped on negative too long and I could get caught up in what the language is, but tapping on the points without language is helpful, but the combination just makes it that much more powerful, right?
Yeah, especially if it's a mental, emotional thing. So much of that is already taking place in your head, and your head is your language center. So if your worry and your anxiety is starting in your mind, which it almost always is, if not always, your mind, your brain is where the language is too. So you're using a brain tool to help the brain out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting how quickly tapping can create results, right?
Yeah, it's always shocked me. It's always
Yeah.
shocked me how quick certain results can be. I would say it depends on the subject matter of your tapping. If you're trying to undo decades of trauma, yes, you could get a little momentary relief. Is it going to cure it? No, you got to keep tapping, and eventually, it can start to help you release that, decades of trauma. But if, like, let's just say you have a tension headache, or maybe your stomach is a little tied in knots, or you have indigestion or something a little bit smaller, tapping can be almost immediately effective on things like that.
Because I think it's immediately grounding. So it's like one of those tools that can have long-term benefit, but also it can, just like a breathing exercise, just ground you in that moment to help release the stress or anxiety. It's like
Yeah.
if you're nervous about going in for an interview or something like that, if you can kind of tap, it's like settling.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's like a breathing exercise. It grounds you by putting you in your body. And so when you're literally tapping on your body, it's hard to be way too up high in your head, because you have to focus on your body. So it is very grounding, like you said. I definitely feel that way.
Yeah. I know like when I was first like starting to learn about tapping and adopt tapping, I thought it had to be like a big issue that I was trying to resolve, like oh, this happened to me when I was like 8 and now I'm trying to get out of it and
Yeah.
stuff that, what I have found was it can help with some of that. But it
Mhm.
also was like just in that moment, so relieving.
Mhm. Which is nice. We like instant things in our culture. We expect everything to happen yesterday, and if not yesterday, at least in that moment. And so tapping is good for people who want quick results because it will give you some degree to, again, depending on what the subject matter is, some degree of relief right away. And, I think one of my biggest successes with tapping is more of a long-term goal. And it wasn't even that long, but it was more over a series of 6 to 8 weeks that I tapped consistently. And I was tapping around money because this is shortly after my divorce when money was still, like hard. And so I was tapping really around money stuff. And within 6 to 8 weeks, so that's not really that long. It's not like it happened in 15 minutes, but 6 to 8 weeks in the grand scheme of life, it's not that long. And I was very consistent with it, very focused on, trying to get out of poverty mentality and really trying to reframe my thoughts around money. And with 6 to 8 weeks, someone called out of the blue, unsolicited. I wasn't even looking for a job, but someone got in touch with me and they were like, hey, there's this job open at a really great place and they want to give you a lot of money. Are you interested? And that is, my income jumped a dramatic amount. And that just came out of the blue after 6 to 8 weeks of tapping around money. I do
I
not
love
think
that
that's a
story.
coincidence. You could say it was a coincidence, but I don't think so.
Yeah. And because you were shifting the energy in your body, you were shifting your thoughts around what's possible. You were, it's almost like that calling in the abundance that you needed in that moment, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And consistency of doing it all, I think really strengthened it, right?
I think if you have kind of a tougher feeling long-term goal, and long-term could just mean a few months or a year, it doesn't have to be like, 20 years from now. So it's still amazing how quickly that happened, Mimi. I mean, I
Yeah.
was blown away and I knew exactly why, it happened too. Um, so yeah, so what I was going to say was if it's a bigger goal, I would say tap more consistently, like really dive into it. If you have a big ask,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
work on it.
Yeah. It's kind of like affirmations. You can't just say it once,
Mm,
trying to shift a thought or a belief.
yeah.
Like it takes a little bit of consistency. I like it. I think one of the things that I was kind of curious about when we started looking at tapping is this a female thing? Like,
Right.
I feel
It's
like
funny.
so much of the work that we do, and because we work with women, we are often like studying women and the effects of women and diving into how can this benefit women specifically. So this tapping thing, because so many of the more prominent people that talk about tapping are men.
Mhm.
And so I was like, I wonder if men also do it too. So I was like trying to do research on it, and I really couldn't find anything that necessarily called out, for women, for men. I think it's pretty universal.
Mhm.
And I also was like, are there certain countries that use it more, certain cultures that use it more? But it is really universal, like the number of people using it and where they use it. I found that very
Is there
encouraging.
anything country specific that a region or?
I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Um, Nothing that was like, no, I would
Yeah.
just say, I just couldn't find anything that was like calling it out. Like lots of stuff, you'll see like there's more centers, like if you do like yoga or spiritual stuff, that like India and certain Eastern countries really have developed um, not a following for it, but an ecosystem that promotes that. But tapping really just seems to be everywhere and for both sexes. And they even are, have children now working with tapping. And I think maybe it's more accessible to men. I know the military's done a lot of work with tapping and using it for PTSD.
Cool. That is so cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead. Go ahead.
you go ahead. I was going to change topics. So,
Oh, well, I was just going to say, 1979, not that long ago. So
no.
I was tapping and it didn't wildly catch on, and it wasn't even called tapping in that day and age. It was like another decade later plus where it really became this, emotional freedom technique and tapping, and started to get picked up by some portion of the culture, a small portion. So I think it's still in its infancy in terms of usage.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It was good. I did find one study that I thought was really fascinating. It was done by the National Library of Medicine, and they looked at 5,000 patients, and they were really comparing tapping and EFT to cognitive behavior theory, which is a beautiful treatment. And I know it does a lot of good. So I was just like, oh, I wonder how these stack up, because I know that so much research has been done into CBT and what's happening there. And the beauty of EFT and tapping is that it's a medication free, and that people can kind of do it on their own and handle it. And often CBT, you're doing it with a counselor or a therapist, and there's often medications involved. So like, how do these two, stack up against each other? And so in this 5,000 person study, they found an improvement in 90% of the people who just received the tapping therapy, as opposed to 63% of the traditional CBT participants.
That blows my mind.
It's crazy, right? And then often with the tapping, and after only 3 sessions. Now, it didn't talk a lot about, what their needs were and what they were trying to uncover, or I didn't dive into the study. I'll link the study below if you want to see what more of it is. But with the tapping, only 3 tapping sessions were needed before the individual's anxiety was reduced. Whereas like with cognitive behavioral theory, they often needed 15 sessions or more. So I thought it was like, I just found that really fascinating. And that the long-term benefits of tapping, like for the participants that had only the tapping regimen, 1 year later, 78% of them were still seeing a high level of improvement. Whereas with the cognitive behavior theory, it was only 69%. So, I mean, that's not a huge percentage difference, but again, the tapping people, it's something that they, maybe because it was so accessible, they could do it all the time. They weren't relying on medications and having to go see somebody and talk about it, which can have its own, sort of levels of strength and anxiety. So I just thought that was a really interesting comparison to what was really a traditional Western approach versus this more sort of spiritual and, non-traditional approach that's kind of gaining speed.
Yeah, that both statistics and percentages blow my mind, actually. 76% of people tapping had relief. And then the year later blows my mind even more, because what medication does that? You take it and you stop taking it, or I don't know who has that kind of result. That's really amazing. It speaks both to the power of CBT and tapping. And what if you did them together? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that would be good. And I just want to put a disclaimer in here that tapping is not a substitute for seeking a mental health professional. Like, if you are really struggling and what you need is professional help, then seek professional help. I think, like Lee was saying, this could be a great addition to any therapies that you are already experiencing. But if you're dealing with real traumatic memories or struggling to manage your daily task because of trauma that you're facing, then definitely seek help from a qualified healthcare professional.
And we're big proponents, just for people who don't know us well. I believe in therapy. I believe in taking pharmaceuticals if you need them. Absolutely. I'm a big supporter of that. I've seen people who maybe wouldn't even be alive if they didn't have those things. So, but I think if they use together, how powerful is that?
Yeah. And I mean, what tapping is going to do, like the main things that tapping is credited with helping is anxiety and depression. Again, it would depend on the level of anxiety and depression that you have. They're using it a lot for PTSD. The military is really, I think, leaning into that a lot. Stress management. So when you're feeling stressed, this is good. But for Lee and I, particularly, what we have been talking about and tapping on and trying to include in all of our work is that weight loss and how you think about your body and deal with your body, and the benefits of body are really benefited with tapping. Like in almost every article or research that we did, they always link weight loss as one of the benefits of tapping.
Yeah, it's so wild. And because I don't know how many people have actually heard of that. We know almost every woman I know, almost, not all, are focused on their weight. And I've never heard someone say, I'm using tapping to help me hit my weight goal. I've never heard. So it's really cool that it can be used that way. And it impacts so many other systems in your body and issues that you're having. It's like a domino effect, because if tapping reduces cortisol and de-stresses you, and a lot of people are emotional eaters, right? We eat for comfort, or if you're having lack of sleep issues and tapping helps that. Sleep has been shown to improve managing your weight if that's something you're focused on. And we don't think you have to be focused on that. I always want to say that, but a lot of women, sadly, are very, very, very focused on weight loss and their weight. So if you can fix the stress, the sleep, and the decision-making skills of a person, it kind of makes sense that what could follow is weight loss.
Yeah, I mean, and we've been talking about how tapping benefits just the mind and the body. So it's like that combination, right? That's so good. And it's a great way to reduce cravings.
Yeah.
But I think that, like when you said decision making, that just really just clicked something in my brain, because when I'm stressed, let me say, decision making is out the window, right? Like all I want to do is self-soothe in that moment and take care of me and get out of stress. And what can I do to get out of stress? Which often led me to the kitchen, to eating, to bad habits, to doing not necessarily the things, like they were like immediate, like how can I buffer out of the stress instead of doing something that's really going to help me address what's causing the feelings of anxiety and unease. Like, look, I just want to buffer them. I want to cover them up. I want to make them go away. So, like I've toyed with tapping, it's one of those things that's like, oh, in the moment here, I need some tapping. I'm going to do some tapping. I'll pull it out of my toolkit and let it be something that I use. But kind of once I finished it for that job, I put it back in the toolkit. Like, okay, that's good. Great. If I need you again, I'll call on you. I don't know why I didn't stick with it, Lee. Like,
it's just, I think it's human nature.
yeah.
Like I feel good now, there's no incentive to keep doing it. And I think with tapping, it's okay. It's okay if you take a break. When you realize, oh, wait, I have this great tool I can use. It's just right there. It's free. It's easy to do almost anywhere at any time. And I think it's human nature. Ideally, would we be doing all these awesome habit things every day? Sure. But it's nice to know you can pull it out when you need it. And it's okay if you stop. You're not going to go backward in time and suddenly be a mess. You have moved forward, because that's the study you pointed to, where a year later they were still doing really well. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've been using it more recently, like to deal with cravings at bedtime. And I think it's like, oh, it's time to go to bed. I'm like stalling. Gotta go wash my face, do all that stuff, get my nighttime routine in before I go to bed. So then my mind would like, when am I stalling? Like I have like, I struggle with a good healthy night's sleep. So I automatically start getting anxious at bedtime. Like, oh, I hope it's going to be a good night's sleep. Da, da, da. So I was like, cravings would hit. So I would notice this pattern happen for a few days, and then I'd be like, oh, why don't I get into tapping? So I've been using tapping to kind of help ease those cravings. So here's what I'm going to try not to do is when that passes and I've kind of broken that cycle of feeling like I have to snack before I go to sleep, that I will keep tapping. Like I don't have to wait until that that's anxiety and stress and nighttime snacking comes back on to start tapping again. Like, what if I just like part of my nighttime routine? One, it also helps a lot with sleep.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was like I was getting a double whammy benefit. But typically in the past, I'd be like, okay, I've done it for a couple of weeks. I feel like I'm solid now, back into the toolkit. So now I'm like really committed to just making this a part of something that I do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a habit to develop. And I do think the more you do it, and you don't have to do like, when we teach it, we tell you like, you can just do this, which is much shorter. You can do this longer version. You can still make it impactful if it's a short session. I love the idea of doing it
Less
before
than 5 minutes. It's like so fast.
It's so fast and very impactful in a very short. It is much like breathing. When you breathe, you have this instant shift. And yeah, it is a lot like that. I mean, my story, I told you guys, I increased my income by a factor of 15. And I attribute it to tapping because it was totally, I wasn't even looking. I wasn't looking for that. And it just came in during that time frame. Still blows my mind.
I know. So now, Lee, don't you think, why don't I just keep tapping on money?
Why? Actually, I am. Like I pulled it back out and because it helps all things. It's not just working, it's working on your internal energy pathways, which are impacting a bunch of things in your life. So I may be focused on one thing or another, but it's going to help everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is really why Lee and I have started incorporating more tapping into all of our programs, because it really does cover a broad swath of benefits.
Yeah, I can't think of something you can't use it for because it just, when you calm yourself down, you just are more capable of doing so many things. You feel better. Those cortisol levels, there's more and more research on the dangers of high cortisol levels. And it is a nice goal to try to reduce that because when you're under stress, you are not doing things as well as you would do them if you were calm. And so many, I think it's a part of our culture that tells us that being keyed up and a little bit fearful and a little bit anxious is actually good. And there may be some truth, like if you're being chased by a lion, you don't want to stop and start tapping while the lion runs at you. You need that stress, you need that adrenaline flowing, and so that you can run and protect yourself. There may be certain situations, because we are designed to go into kind of a anxious mode, but it's only appropriate at certain times. It shouldn't be a lifestyle of that. And I think our culture encourages us to stay keyed up a lot.
Yeah, it's like get it done, get it done, get it done. More. How much can you accomplish? I can keep that churning energy. Well, what I love about tapping, I just had that thought pop in my head, is it both is calming and that it settles your nervous system and it grounds you and it kind of energizes you, but it's in that good energizing way. Like I'm excited about what's possible for me. I'm seeing successes. I'm in a more like easier to get into that kind of flow, good energy. Like it's really cool how it can do both things.
That bringing up flow is beautiful. That is such a nice concept to pair with this, because most people are aware of what flow is, but it's a state you can get into where you are your most productive and oddly your calmest and most satisfied. And if in the study of flow, it has been shown that when, this is another well-studied phenomenon because they use it in sports all the time, when you're too anxious, you pivot out of flow, and then you're arguably not at your most productive, feeling your best. So anxiety, in quick bursts to get something quick done, maybe, but it just isn't a lifestyle, and it doesn't make you your most effective, and it can start to mess up your decision making.
Yeah. And especially like to bring it back to weight loss and why we are incorporating in our programs, it is to help with that decision-making piece, don't you think?
Yes, because there's some limited number of decisions our brains can make in one day. I forget what the number is, but it's shockingly low when you think of all the decisions we make in any given day.
I think it's only like 200.
Yeah, it's somewhere around 200 or even under. And I wanted to say 177, but where did that number come from? I have no idea. So, but I think, yeah, let's just say 200 decisions. But think from morning all the way to the time you go to bed, how many decisions you're making. You're out of your decision making. You're out of pocket, after a certain time of the day. And then if you get those later evening hunger, and I always get, no matter how big my dinner was, right before bed, I have a fear that I will starve. I have some fear that I'll be hungry in the middle of the night. And who knows where I got that? I don't know where I got that. It's not like I've never been without food. So, but I actually get kind of panicky at the idea that I'm hungry before bed. That makes me feel anxious. So I love the idea of tapping to try to shift that energy,
It's been working, Lee. I highly recommend it.
Mhm.
Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Whew, that's a lot on tapping.
It's a lot on tapping. I'm excited about what we're doing over this coming week. Mimi, we're both going to read Nick Ortner's book, The Tapping Solution.
Me too. Me too. So join us, tune in next week. And it's going to be kind of like a book club discussion between Lee and I. Certainly shoot us questions if you've been reading it and you have thoughts about it. We'd love to hear what those are. But yeah, I think it'll be. I'm excited.
I've known about Nick Ortner and followed him, I don't know, for over a decade easily. And he's a lovely, lovely man, I think. Big heart and very articulate. And so I'm expecting the book will be good. And he's big into tapping too. So I'm just really curious what I'm going to learn by reading this book. I might be doing it on Audible, but I'll at least listen to it.
It's called The Tapping Solution, a revolutionary system for stress-free living. Like, why wouldn't you want that? Do you have things in your life that you wish were different that you don't know how to change? And he talks about tapping as this new technique to deal with seemingly impossible situations. So it'll be fascinating to read.
Yeah. So we're excited. So join us for that book discussion, and always write to us if you have questions or comments, anything. We love to hear from you. So we tend to pick a song at the end of our episode that we think kind of captures, and this is meant to be humorous. It's not going to be like an exact match. Like, we don't have a tapping song. I'm sorry to say, there's no tapping song that we could pick. But this one is a classic song by Bob Dylan. It's one of his, when I was reading up on this, it's one of his most covered tunes. A couple of famous people you might recognize who did a cover, Eric Clapton and Guns N' Roses, but there was a whole long list I just didn't feel like writing down. But yeah, one of his most covered tunes, Knocking on Heaven's Door. So I was just thinking, we were talking about the song for this, and tap is like tap, tap, tap. And so the line knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door came to me. So the lyrics aren't necessarily like happy peppy, but it's still a really classic, good tune.
Yeah. So we've added it to our Spotify playlist. So we'll have the link to that below too. So if you're a Spotify listener, go listen in on our playlist.
Yes. Yay. So that
See
was
you next week to talk about the book.
See you next week. Bye. Hey there. Thank you so much for listening. In fact, if this resonated with you and you know someone else who needs to hear this, please share our episodes. We would just love that. We also would love it if you would follow, subscribe, and rate our channel, because this lets us know you're actually there and it helps us show up in searches, which would be awesome. Please be a part of our community and mission to help as many women as possible free themselves from diet culture so that they can go beyond dieting.